The phone rang at 11 minutes past 2 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been staring at the clock on the microwave in the service kitchen, waiting for the cycle to finish on the industrial dishwasher so I could put away the crystal stemware from Mr. Valenti's dinner party. 14 guests, 42 wine glasses, 7 courses. The kind of event where I moved through rooms like smoke, refilling water goblets, and clearing plates before anyone noticed their absence. I was not supposed to be in the East Wing corridor at that hour. The cleaning schedule had me finishing in the service areas by midnight, then returning to my quarters in the converted carriage house behind the main estate. But one of the newer girls, Marta, had forgotten to polish the brass handles on the library doors, and Mrs. Castellano would notice first thing in the morning. Mrs. Castellano noticed everything. So I had taken the polishing cloth and the tenebrazo and made my way through the sleeping house, my soft-soled shoes silent on the marble floors. The East Wing was Mr. Valenti's private domain. His study, his bedroom suite, his personal library where he conducted business that the rest of the staff pretended not to know about. In 3 years of working at the Valenti estate, I had cleaned that wing exactly 4 times. Always during daylight hours, always with Mrs. Castellano supervising, always with the doors open and guards standing at intervals along the hallway. Tonight, there were no guards. The dinner guests had left hours ago, their black cars disappearing one by one down the long gravel drive. The security team had relaxed into their overnight positions, 2 men at the front gate, 2 at the back, 1 walking the perimeter every 30 minutes. I had memorized their patterns without meaning to. It was something my mind did automatically, cataloging routines and rhythms, noting when things were different from the way they should be. The phone rang a second time, the sound muffled by the heavy oak door of the study. I should have walked away. Every instinct I had developed over 31 years of life, every lesson I had learned about staying invisible and keeping my head down and not asking questions, told me to turn around and go back to the service wing, but my hands had already stopped moving. The polishing cloth hung limp in my fingers. And somewhere beneath the thundering of my own heartbeat, I heard a voice. It was not Mr. Valenti's voice. The study door was not fully closed. There was a gap of perhaps 2 inches where the latch had not caught, and through that gap came words in Italian, rapid and low, spoken by someone whose voice I did not recognize. I stood absolutely still. The hallway was dark except for the moonlight filtering through the window at the far end, and in that silver half-light I became what I had always been best at being. Nothing. No one. A shadow pressed against the wall, breathing so shallowly that my chest barely moved. The voice on the phone was giving instructions. I understood every word. This was not supposed to be possible. According to my employment file, according to the background check that Valenti's people had run before hiring me, according to everything I had told Mrs. Castellano during my interview, I was Alma Reyes, born in Guatemala City, raised in Los Angeles, educated in public schools, fluent only in English and Spanish. My Italian was listed as non-existent. I had never corrected this assumption because it had never mattered and because the truth was something I had learned to guard more carefully than any secret I might overhear. My mother was Italian. My father was Guatemalan. They had met in Rome when she was 19 and working as a seamstress in her aunt's shop, and he was 23 and studying architecture at the university. They had fallen in love in the way young people do, recklessly and completely, and when my grandmother discovered the relationship, she had given my mother a choice, the family or the foreigner. My mother chose love. She told me the story many times, how she had stood in her grandmother's kitchen with tears streaming down her face and said the words that would exile her forever. She chose the man who looked at her like she was the only light in a dark world. She chose uncertainty over security, passion over comfort, the unknown over everything she had ever known. She and my father married in a civil ceremony and immigrated to the United States 2 months before I was born, settling in a neighborhood in East Los Angeles where no one cared where you came from as long as you paid your rent on time. They had nothing when they arrived. No connections, no money, no family support. My father took jobs on construction sites, learning English phrase by phrase from the other workers. My mother took in sewing, spending her evenings bent over fabric while I played at her feet. They were happy, despite everything. They had given up. Despite the hardships they faced, they were happy. I remember the way my father would come home exhausted from work and still find the energy to dance with my mother in our tiny kitchen. I remember the sound of their laughter echoing through the thin walls of our apartment. I remember the way they looked at each other as if no one else in the world existed. My mother taught me Italian the way other mothers taught their children lullabies, in whispers before sleep, in songs while she braided my hair, in stories about a country I'd never seen and relatives I would never meet. She died when I was 16, a blood clot in her brain that the doctor said was almost certainly painless, almost certainly instant. My father lasted another 3 years before his heart gave out, though I always believed it had stopped the same moment hers did. I kept my mother's language the way I kept her wedding ring, hidden and precious, something that belonged only to me. I never spoke it at work. I never let anyone know I understood it. In the houses where I had cleaned before coming to the Valenti estate, this had been a useful secret. Rich people spoke freely in front of the help, especially when they believed the help could not understand. I had learned things I did not want to know about divorces and affairs and business dealings that skirted the edge of legality. I'd kept my mouth shut and my head down and saved enough money to rent a small apartment and buy a used car and live a life that was quiet and unremarkable and safe. The voice on the phone said something that made my blood turn to ice. Friday. The Castelletti meeting. He will be in the car alone between 2 and 2:15. The driver is already ours. Make sure the replacement vehicle is in position. No witnesses. The body goes to the processing facility in Bridgeport. A pause, then the voice again, harder now, impatient. I don't care what Greco promised him. Valenti is a dead man walking. He just doesn't know it yet. The line went dead. I heard movement inside the study, footsteps approaching the door, and my body moved before my mind could catch up. I pressed myself into the alcove behind a marble bust of some long-dead ancestor, my polishing cloth clutched to my chest, my breath frozen in my lungs. The door opened. Light spilled into the hallway. I saw the shape of a man silhouetted against the glow, tall and broad-shouldered, and I recognized him by the way he moved, by the deliberate economy of his gestures. Stefano Greco, Mr. Valenti's most trusted advisor, his right hand, the man who handled the business that could not be discussed in front of the household staff. He walked past my hiding place without glancing in my direction. His footsteps faded down the corridor, and a moment later I heard the click of a door closing somewhere in the distance. I did not move. I stood in that alcove for what felt like hours, my heart beating so hard I was certain it would bruise my ribs, my mind racing through the implications of what I had just heard. They were going to kill him. In 3 days, during a meeting with another family, they were going to put Dominic Valenti in a car with a driver who had been bought by his enemies, and they were going to murder him, and they were going to dispose of his body in some industrial facility where no one would ever find it. And Stefano Greco, the man he trusted more than anyone, was the one making it happen. I should have gone to bed. I should have finished polishing the brass handles and returned to my quarters and pretended I had heard nothing. This was not my business. Dominic Valenti was my employer, not my friend. I cleaned his house and washed his dishes and changed his sheets, and in return he paid me a salary that was generous by domestic staff standards. I knew what he was. Everyone who worked for him knew what he was. The dinner parties with men in expensive suits who spoke in coded language, the guards with guns beneath their jackets. The way certain topics were never discussed, certain rooms were never entered, certain questions were never asked. I had no illusions about the nature of his work or the violence that sustained it. Men like him did not become rich and powerful through legitimate means. They built their empires on the backs of people who could not fight back, and they maintained those empires through fear and force and the occasional elimination of anyone who got in their way. But I kept seeing his daughter's face. Isabella was 7 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's delicate features, and she was the only person in this house who had ever spoken to me like I was a human being rather than a piece of furniture. Her mother had died in childbirth, a tragedy that was spoken of in hushed tones among the staff, and in the years since, Isabella had attached herself to anyone who showed her kindness. She called me Miss Alma. She asked me questions about where I lived and whether I had any pets and what my favorite color was. Last month, she had given me a drawing she had made in school, a picture of a house with a yellow sun and green grass and stick figures holding hands in front of it. "I have one for you and one for me," she had said, her face serious with the importance of the gift, so we match. I had taped my copy of that drawing to the wall of my bedroom in the carriage house. I looked at it every morning when I woke up and every night before I went to sleep. It was the only piece of art I owned. If Dominic Valenti died, what would happen to Isabella. She had no mother. Her only living relatives on that side were elderly aunts who lived in Sicily and had never visited. She would be orphaned at 7 years old, raised by strangers, or absorbed into a system that would view her primarily as an asset, the heir to her father's empire, a bargaining chip in the endless negotiations between families. She would lose the only parent she had ever known, and she would spend the rest of her life wondering why no one had saved him. I went back to my quarters. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I did not sleep. In the morning, I reported for my shift at 6 o'clock as usual. I put on my uniform, the simple gray dress and white apron that rendered me indistinguishable from the other 7 women on the domestic staff. I tied my dark hair back in a neat bun and made sure my shoes were polished and my nails were clean and my face showed nothing of the turmoil inside me. Mrs. Castellano assigned me to the second floor, guest bedrooms and bathrooms, and I worked my way through each room with the mechanical efficiency I had perfected over years of practice. Dust the surfaces, vacuum the carpets, change the linens, polish the mirrors, check the bathrooms for supplies, note any damage or irregularities, move on to the next room. I saw Mr. Valenti once briefly as he walked down the main staircase while I was polishing the banister. He did not look at me. He was on his phone, speaking in clipped sentences about a shipment that had been delayed, and his security detail flanked him like shadows. 3 men in dark suits with earpieces and the barely visible bulge of weapons beneath their jackets. He looked tired. There were lines around his eyes that I did not remember seeing before, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested he had not slept well. He was 43 years old, according to the staff gossip, though he moved with the coiled energy of a much younger man. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and his features were the kind that photographers would have called striking rather than handsome. Hard angles and deep-set eyes and a mouth that rarely smiled. He passed within 3 feet of me and did not slow down. I was invisible. I had made myself invisible. This was the skill that had kept me employed and alive for 15 years of domestic work in houses where secrets were currency. And discretion was survival. But as I watched him disappear through the front door, my hand tightened on the polishing cloth and I felt something shift inside my chest. I had 48 hours to decide whether to warn him. 48 hours to figure out how to tell a man I had never spoken to directly that his most trusted advisor was planning his murder. 48 hours to weigh my own safety against the life of a 7-year-old girl's father. That night, I broke into Stefano Greco's office. I should explain that breaking into is perhaps too dramatic a description for what actually happened. The office was locked, yes, but Mrs. Castellano had a master key that she kept in the pocket of her cardigan, and that cardigan was always hung on the same hook in the staff lounge during lunch hour. I had noticed this months ago, the way she would pat the pocket before leaving to make sure the key was secure, and I had filed the information away without any intention of using it. Information was like that for me. It accumulated. My mind collected details the way other people collected stamps or coins, sorting and cataloging and storing for future reference. The key was cold in my palm as I made my way through the darkened house. It was 2 a.m. again, that dead hour when the night shift guards were at their most complacent and the security cameras rotated through their program sequences in predictable 30-second intervals. I had timed my route to avoid them. I had memorized the blind spots. I had chosen dark clothing instead of my uniform and soft shoes that made no sound on the marble floors. Greco's office was on the first floor in a wing of the house that was dedicated to administrative functions. There was a records room, a small conference room, offices for the household manager and the head of security, and at the end of the hallway, the private space where Greco conducted whatever business he conducted on behalf of his employer. The door opened smoothly. I slipped inside and closed it behind me, and for a long moment I simply stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The room smelled of leather and cologne and something else, something metallic that I could not quite identify. There was a desk, heavy and expensive, with a leather chair behind it and 2 smaller chairs in front. There were bookshelves along one wall filled with volumes that looked more decorative than functional. There was a filing cabinet locked and a safe behind a painting that I was not even going to attempt. But there was also a phone on the desk, and beside it a notepad with impressions from whatever had been written on the page above. I did not turn on the lights. I used the flashlight on my phone, shielded by my cupped hand, to examine the notepad. The impressions were faint but readable if I held the light at the right angle. Numbers, an address, a time. And at the bottom, 2 words that confirmed everything I had overheard. Castelletti meeting. I took a photograph of the notepad. I took photographs of the desk, the filing cabinet, the calendar on the wall with certain dates circled in red. I did not know what evidence I might need, but I knew that having it was better than not having it. My hands were shaking as I moved through the room, documenting everything I could find. There were other papers on the desk, contracts and correspondence in Italian that I read as quickly as I could manage in the dim light of my phone screen. Some of it was innocuous, routine business that any legitimate company might conduct, but some of it was not. There were references to shipments that clearly were not merchandise. There were coded conversations about problems that needed to be handled. There were names I recognized from news reports about organized crime, names that made my blood run cold. I had known what Valenti was. Everyone who worked for him knew, but seeing the evidence laid out like this, in black and white, made it real in a way that simply cleaning blood from marble floors never had. This was a world of violence and consequences. A world where mistakes were measured in bodies and silence was the only currency that mattered. For a moment, I considered putting everything back and walking away. I could leave this house tomorrow, find another job, disappear into the vast anonymity of the city. No one would come looking for me. No one would care. I was a maid, invisible and forgettable, and that invisibility could protect me if I let it. But then I thought about Isabella again. About her small hand in mine as we walked through the garden, about the drawing on my wall, the one with the stick figures holding hands. I finished taking my photographs and checked the room one final time to make sure I had left no trace of my presence. When I left the office, I locked the door behind me and returned the key to Mrs. Castellano's cardigan pocket. No one saw me. No one would ever know I had been there. The next morning, Friday, I requested a meeting with Mr. Valenti. Mrs. Castellano looked at me as if I had grown a second head. I had been working at the estate for 3 years, and in all that time, I had never asked for anything except the standard days off and the occasional schedule adjustment. I had never complained. I had never caused problems. I had never done anything to draw attention to myself. "It is a personal matter," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Something I cannot discuss with anyone else." She studied me with those sharp eyes that missed nothing, and I saw the calculations happening behind them. Was I pregnant? Was I in legal trouble? Was I planning to quit? None of these possibilities seemed to please her, but after a long moment she nodded. "He has 15 minutes at 4 o'clock, between his call with Singapore and his dinner preparations. Do not be late." I was not late. I arrived at the door of his study at exactly 4 o'clock, wearing my uniform because I had no other clothes that would be appropriate, my hands clasped in front of me to hide their trembling. The guard outside the door looked me over with barely concealed contempt and then knocked twice. "The maid," he said through the door. "She requested a meeting." There was a pause, then a voice low and cold. "Send her in." The study was smaller than I expected. There was a desk similar to the one in Greco's office, but older, more worn as if it had been in this room for generations. There were bookshelves crammed with actual books, their spines cracked from use. There was a window overlooking the gardens, and in front of that window stood Dominic Valenti with his back to me, his hands clasped behind him, his posture suggesting that whatever I had to say would be a waste of his time. I closed the door behind me. "You have something to discuss," he said without turning around. I took a breath. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, but now that it was happening, all my prepared words scattered like birds from a tree. "I heard a phone call," I said, 2 nights ago, in the East Wing corridor." He went very still. His hands did not move from their position behind his back, but I saw his shoulders shift, a subtle tension entering his frame. "You are not supposed to be in the East Wing corridor," he said. "No, I was not. I was polishing the brass handles on the library doors. Marta forgot to do it, and Mrs. Castellano would have noticed." A pause. Then slowly he turned to face me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, assessing, cataloging everything about me in the same way that I catalog details about everyone else. "What did you hear?" I told him. I told him about Greco's voice on the phone, about the Castelletti meeting, about the driver who had been bought, about the replacement vehicle and the processing facility in Bridgeport. I told him about the notepad in the office and the photographs I had taken. I told him everything, and when I was finished, I stood there in the silence that followed and waited for whatever would come next. He did not move. For a long moment, he simply looked at me, and I had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing something beyond my uniform and my neat bun and my carefully blank expression, something I had worked very hard to keep hidden. "Why?" he asked finally. I did not pretend to misunderstand the question. Your daughter, I said. Isabella. She gave me a drawing last month, a picture of a house with stick figures holding hands. Something flickered in his eyes, too fast for me to identify. That is not a reason to risk your life, he said. Maybe not, I agreed, but it is a reason to try. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece, the distant sound of someone moving in the hallway outside. Finally, he spoke again. How did you understand the phone call? I felt my pulse quicken, but kept my voice steady. Mr. Greco was speaking Italian. You told Mrs. Castellano you do not speak Italian. I told Mrs. Castellano what I tell everyone. It is easier to be invisible when people think you cannot understand them. For the first time, something that might have been the ghost of a smile crossed his face. It was gone so quickly I could have imagined it. You are not what you seem, he said. It was not a question. No one is, I replied. He studied me for another long moment, and I held his gaze without flinching. I had spent my entire life learning to make myself small, to fold inward, to disappear into backgrounds and blend into crowds. But in that moment, in that study, with the weight of his attention on me like a physical force, I let myself be seen, just for a moment, just enough for him to understand that I was not simply a maid who had overheard a conversation. I was someone who had made a choice. The meeting with Castelletti is in 3 hours, he said. If what you have told me is true, certain arrangements will need to be changed. If what I have told you is true, I said, Stefano Greco needs to believe that nothing has changed. Otherwise, he will find another way. His eyes narrowed slightly. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that you go to the meeting, take a different driver, take a different route. Let Greco think his plan is working until the moment it fails. Another silence. Then he walked to his desk and pressed a button on the phone. Marco, I need you in the study. And bring Romano. 2 men appeared within minutes, both of them hard-faced and watchful, both of them carrying themselves with the coiled readiness of people who are used to violence. Valenti spoke to them in rapid Italian, and I understood every word, but I kept my expression carefully neutral, as if I were simply waiting to be dismissed. He told them about Greco. He told them about the driver. He told them about the photographs I had taken. When he was finished, both men looked at me with expressions that I could not read. She comes with us, one of them said. Marco, I assumed, until we know this is not a setup. Valenti's gaze flicked to me. Will that be a problem? No, I said. It will not be a problem. That is how I found myself in the back of an armored SUV 3 hours later, wedged between 2 bodyguards watching Dominic Valenti pretend to be unaware that his trusted advisor had planned his death. We took a different route than the one Greco had arranged. We used a different driver, a man named Paolo who had been with the family for 20 years and whose loyalty was beyond question. We arrived at the Castelletti compound from the east instead of the west, and when Valenti walked into the meeting room, he did so with the full knowledge that somewhere out there, an ambush was waiting for a car that would never arrive. I was kept in a small room adjacent to the main meeting space. There were no windows. There was a single chair and a table with a pitcher of water and a glass. Marco stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching me with eyes that gave nothing away. You took a significant risk, he said after we had been there for perhaps 20 minutes, warning him. I know. Why? I had been asked this question twice now in the span of 3 hours. My answer was the same. His daughter gave me a drawing, I said. It seemed like a poor reason to let her become an orphan. Marco's expression did not change, but something shifted in the quality of his silence. After a moment, he nodded. The meeting lasted for 2 more hours. When it was over, Valenti appeared in the doorway of my small room, his face still unreadable, his posture still coiled with that controlled energy that never seemed to dissipate. The situation has been handled, he said. Greco and his associates are no longer a concern. I did not ask what that meant. I did not want to know. You will return to the estate, he continued. You will continue your duties as normal. Nothing about your role will change. I understood the message beneath the words. Silence. Discretion. The pretense that none of this had ever happened. Yes, sir, I said, but he did not leave. He stood in the doorway studying me with that assessing gaze that seemed to see far more than I wanted to show. My daughter speaks of you, he said finally. She says you are kind. I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing. Kindness is a rare quality in this house, he continued. In this world, do not lose it. Then he was gone, and Marco was escorting me back to the SUV. And within an hour, I was standing in my small bedroom in the carriage house, staring at Isabella's drawing on the wall, wondering what I had done. The weeks that followed were strange. On the surface, nothing changed. I reported for my shifts at 6 o'clock. I wore my uniform, I cleaned the rooms I was assigned, and polished the surfaces I was supposed to polish, and moved through the house like smoke, invisible and forgettable. Mrs. Castellano never asked about my meeting with Mr. Valenti. The other staff members never noticed that I had been absent for several hours on that Friday evening. Stefano Greco's disappearance was explained away as an extended business trip, and if anyone suspected the truth, they were too wise to voice their suspicions. But I felt Valenti's attention now, not constantly, not obviously, but in small moments that accumulated like snowflakes. I would be polishing a mirror and sense someone watching, and when I turned, I would catch a glimpse of him in a doorway before he moved on. I would be walking down a corridor and hear his voice in a nearby room, and my skin would prickle with awareness. He never spoke to me directly. He never acknowledged what had happened between us. But there was a weight to his presence when I was nearby, a quality of focus that had not been there before. Isabella, meanwhile, had decided that I was her favorite person in the entire household. She sought me out at every opportunity, appearing in doorways and around corners, with questions about butterflies and cloud shapes and whether I thought it would snow this winter. Her nanny, a young woman named Sophia, who seemed perpetually exhausted, began to look at me with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. Mrs. Castellano noticed the attention and frowned, but said nothing. I was careful to maintain professional boundaries, to finish my work before engaging with Isabella, to never let my affection for her interfere with my duties. But I loved her. That was the truth I could not deny. I loved her bright curiosity and her serious little face and the way she held my hand sometimes when we walked through the gardens together. I loved the drawings she made for me, each one more elaborate than the last. I loved that she called me Miss Alma and that she trusted me with secrets about her imaginary friends and her fear of the dark and her wish that her father would not work so much. 3 months after the Castelletti meeting, Valenti called me into his study again. I had not been inside that room since the night I warned him about Greco. The space felt different now, charged with the memory of what had passed between us. He was sitting behind his desk this time, papers spread before him, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. "Close the door," he said. I did. "Sit." I sat in one of the chairs across from him and folded my hands in my lap. He did not look up from his papers for a long moment. "Isabella has a birthday in 3 weeks," he said finally. "She will be 8. "Yes," I said, though I was not sure why he was telling me this. "She has requested a specific guest for her celebration." He looked up then, and there was something in his expression that I could not quite read. "She asked for you?" I felt my heart stutter. "Mr. Valenti, I am not sure that would be appropriate. I am a member of your staff. It would not look right for me to attend a family celebration. I am not in the habit of denying my daughter's requests," he said, "especially not ones that make her happy." I did not know what to say to that. "You will attend," he continued, "not as staff, as a guest. Sophia will help you find something appropriate to wear." I opened my mouth to protest again, but something in his eyes stopped me. He was not asking. He was informing me of a decision that had already been made. "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded, and that was the end of the conversation. I left his study with my thoughts spinning. The birthday party was held in the garden, under a tent that had been decorated with streamers and balloons in Isabella's favorite colors. There were perhaps 40 guests, mostly children from her school with their parents, all of them moving through the festivities with the kind of careful politeness that came from being in the home of someone powerful and dangerous. I stood near the edge of the crowd in a dress that Sophia had chosen for me, a simple blue sheath that cost more than my monthly salary, and tried not to feel like an imposter. Isabella found me within minutes. She grabbed my hand and dragged me toward the cake table, chattering about the flavor she had chosen and the candle she would blow out and the wish she was going to make. I smiled and nodded and let myself be swept up in her excitement. "You came," she kept saying. "You really came." "Of course I came," I told her. "You invited me." She beamed at me, and in that moment I felt something crack open in my chest. I had spent so many years being invisible, being careful, being nothing to anyone, and here was this child who saw me, who wanted me there, who was genuinely happy that I existed. Later, after the cake had been cut and the presents had been opened and the guests had begun to drift away, I found myself standing alone by the rose bushes at the edge of the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and I was thinking about my mother, about the songs she used to sing to me in Italian, about the way she would braid my hair while telling me stories of the country she had left behind. She would have liked you. I turned to find Valenti standing a few feet away. He had changed out of his suit into something more casual, slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he looked almost human in the fading light. Who would have liked me? I asked. My wife, he said. Lucia. She would have seen what I see. I did not ask what he meant by that. I was not sure I wanted to know. Isabella talks about you constantly, he continued. She says you are the only person who really listens to her, who treats her like she matters. She does matter, I said. She's wonderful. Yes. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. She's all I have. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning I was not equipped to interpret. I thought about the night I had warned him, about the choice I had made to risk everything for a child I barely knew. I thought about the weeks since then, the weight of his attention, the way my pulse quickened whenever he was nearby. I should go, I said. The party is over. Stay. It was not a command. Not quite, but there was something in his voice that made my feet root to the ground. I do not know what you want from me, I said honestly. I am your employee. I clean your house. That is all I'm qualified to be. He turned to face me fully, and in the dying light, his expression was unguarded in a way I had never seen before. You saved my life, he said. You risked everything to warn me about a threat I did not see coming. You asked for nothing in return. In my experience, people always want something. Money, power, favor. You wanted nothing except to keep a little girl from losing her father. I did what anyone would have done, I said. No. He shook his head. You did not. Anyone else would have stayed silent. Anyone else would have protected themselves. You chose to protect me, and you chose to protect my daughter, and you did it knowing that it could cost you everything. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. I have been watching you, he continued, these past months, trying to understand who you are, why you did what you did. What makes someone like you exist in a world like mine? And what have you concluded? That I do not deserve you, he said quietly, but that I cannot seem to let you go. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood about my place in this house, in this world, in his life. I thought about the years I'd spent being invisible, the careful walls I had built around my heart. I thought about my mother's voice teaching me Italian in the darkness, promising me that someday I would find a home. I am not asking for anything, I said. I do not expect anything from you. I know that is what makes this so difficult. He reached out and his fingers brushed my cheek, the lightest possible touch. I felt it like lightning. I cannot offer you safety, he said. I cannot offer you a normal life. Everything about my world is dangerous, and anyone close to me becomes a target. You know what I am. You know what I do. If you walk away right now, I will let you go. I will give you a reference that will open any door you choose. You can disappear and never think about any of this again. And if I don't walk away, then you stay, he said, and we see what this becomes. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the risks, the dangers, the 1,000 ways this could end in disaster. I thought about Greco and the phone call and the cold efficiency with which Valenti's enemies had plotted his death. I thought about the blood I had cleaned from these floors, the secrets I had pretended not to know, the violence that lurked beneath the polished surface of this beautiful house. And then I thought about Isabella's face when she saw me at her party, the way she had grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the cake, the drawings taped to my wall, the feeling of being seen, truly seen for the first time in longer than I could remember. I am not going anywhere, I said. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper. Good, he said. Then we begin. The months that followed were a strange mixture of ordinary and extraordinary. My duties in the house did not change, though my position became something harder to define. I was still a maid, technically. I still wore my uniform. I still reported to Mrs. Castellano, but I also attended dinners with Valenti's business associates sitting at his side while he conducted negotiations in a language I was no longer pretending not to understand. I was present during meetings that would have been unthinkable for a domestic employee. I was trusted with information that could have gotten me killed. And Isabella bloomed like a flower in spring, her brightness filling every corner of my life. She called me Miss Alma in front of the staff and Alma when we were alone. She told me about her days at school and her dreams and her fears. She asked me to braid her hair the way my mother used to braid mine, and I did, singing softly in Italian while her small body relaxed against me. Valenti watched these interactions with an expression I could not read. He never interfered, he never commented. But sometimes I would catch him looking at us with something in his eyes that might have been hope. The danger did not go away. There were threats always. Other families who resented his power, former associates who nursed grudges, government agencies who circled like sharks, waiting for an opportunity to strike. I learned to recognize the signs of trouble, the subtle shifts in security protocols, the tension in the guards' postures. I learned to read the house the way I read people, cataloging changes and anomalies, staying alert even in moments of apparent calm. One night, nearly a year after that first meeting in his study, I was in my bedroom in the carriage house when I heard footsteps outside my door. Not the careful footsteps of a guard on patrol, something heavier, more deliberate. I reached for the knife I kept in my nightstand, a habit I had developed in the months since everything changed, and moved silently toward the window. The door opened before I could react. 2 men, masked, armed, they were inside my room before I could scream, but I had learned things in the past year. I had trained with Marco and Romano, learning basic self-defense, learning to fight dirty and fast and without hesitation. I was not the same invisible maid who had stood frozen in a hallway listening to plans for murder. I stabbed the first man in the thigh before he could grab me. He went down with a howl of pain. The second man was faster, smarter. He caught my arm before I could swing again and twisted, sending the knife clattering across the floor. I felt his hand close around my throat, cutting off my air, and in that moment, I was certain I was going to die. Then the window shattered inward and Marco was there, gun raised, moving with the lethal efficiency I had seen in training but never in action. The man holding me dropped before I could register what was happening. Blood spattered across my nightgown. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. "Are you hurt?" Marco asked, already moving to check the bodies. I shook my head. I could not speak. "Get up! We need to move!" He half carried me across the grounds to the main house, where Valenti was waiting in the foyer with the fury in his eyes that made me understand, for the first time, exactly how dangerous he was. "Who sent them?" he asked Marco, his voice terrifyingly calm. "We are still determining that. The one she stabbed is alive. We can question him." Valenti's gaze shifted to me. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides and pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could feel his heart hammering against my cheek. "I thought I lost you," he said into my hair, when Marco called and said there were intruders in the carriage. "House, I thought I lost you." "I'm okay," I managed. "I'm okay." But I was shaking. My whole body was shaking, and when he pulled back to look at my face, I saw something in his expression that had not been there before. "This cannot continue," he said. "I cannot keep you safe in a separate building. From now on, you stay in the main house." I opened my mouth to argue, to point out the impropriety of it, the gossip it would cause among the staff. But then I saw his eyes, the fear still lurking beneath the anger, and I understood that this was not about propriety. "Okay," I said. "Okay." The room he gave me was on the same floor as his own, 3 doors down from Isabella's suite. It was larger than my entire apartment in the carriage house, with a sitting area and a private bathroom and windows that overlooked the gardens where I had first let myself imagine a different kind of future. Mrs. Castellano said nothing about the change in my living arrangements. Neither did the other staff members. But I saw the looks they exchanged, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. I was no longer one of them. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Isabella, predictably, was thrilled. "Now we are neighbors," she announced when she discovered my new room. "I can come visit you every single day." I laughed, and for a moment I forgot about the intruders and the blood on my nightgown and the 1,000 ways my life had spun out of any recognizable orbit. The man I had stabbed talked. He gave up names and dates and locations, a cascade of information that led Valenti's people to a rival family in the city who had been nursing a grudge for years. The threat was neutralized within a week. I never asked what that meant. I did not want to know, but something had shifted between us. The distance Valenti had maintained, the careful boundaries he had constructed, began to erode. He found reasons to be where I was. He appeared in doorways when I was reading to Isabella. He joined us for dinner in the family dining room instead of eating alone in his study. One evening, he took my hand during a movie Isabella had insisted we all watch together, and he did not let go until the credits rolled. "I love you," he said that night, standing in the hallway outside my door. "I know it is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this should not work. But I love you, and I am tired of pretending otherwise." I looked at him, this man who had terrified me once, who still terrified me sometimes, when I glimpsed the cold calculation in his eyes. This man who read bedtime stories to his daughter in different voices. This man who had rebuilt his entire security operation after I was attacked, who had personally interviewed every new hire, who had sworn that no one would ever touch me again. "I love you too," I said. "I think I have for a long time." He kissed me then, there in the hallway where anyone could see, and I kissed him back and the walls I had built around. My heart came crumbling down like ancient cities under siege. 2 years passed, 2 years of quiet mornings and complicated evenings, of Isabella growing taller and smarter and more beautiful with every passing month. 2 years of learning the rhythms of this strange life, of finding my place in a world I had never expected to inhabit. He asked me to marry him on a Tuesday. We were in the garden, the same garden where he had first told me that his wife would have liked me. Isabella was at school, and the house was quiet, and he had pulled me away from my duties without explanation. "I do not have a ring," he said. "I wanted to ask you before I chose one, so that whatever you wear, you will know it was chosen with your answer in mind." I stared at him. My heart was beating so fast I was certain he could hear it. "You want to marry me?" "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said. "I want Isabella to have a mother who loves her. I want to wake up next to you every morning and know that you are mine, truly mine, in the eyes of the law and the church and everyone who doubts that someone like you could choose someone like me." I thought about the girl I had been, the invisible maid who had overheard a phone call and made a choice. I thought about my mother, teaching me Italian in the dark, promising me that I would find a home. "Yes," I said. "Yes." The wedding was small, just family and the few friends we trusted absolutely. Isabella was my flower girl, scattering rose petals down the aisle with a concentration that made everyone smile. I wore a dress that my mother would have loved, simple and elegant, the color of cream. When Valenti slipped the ring onto my finger, a delicate band of platinum set with a single sapphire, I saw his hands tremble. This man who never showed weakness. This man who commanded empires with a gesture, trembling for me. "I love you," I whispered. "I know," he said. And then he kissed me, and we were married, and everything I had ever wanted was, suddenly, impossibly, mine. 3 years later, on a spring evening when the garden was blooming and Isabella was practicing piano in the music room and the world felt impossibly peaceful, I stood on the terrace and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Dominic came up behind me, sliding his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That night," I said, "the phone call I was not supposed to understand." He was silent for a moment, then he pressed a kiss to my temple. "I think about it too," he said, "about how close I came to losing everything before I even knew what I had." I turned in his arms so I could see his face. He looked older now, more gray at his temples, more lines around his eyes. But he was still the man who had let me see him vulnerable, still the man who had rebuilt his world around me. "I love you," I said. "I love this life. I love our family." He held me tighter, and we stood there watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere in the house, Isabella finished her piano piece and started another. Something more difficult, something she had been practicing for weeks. The notes drifted through the open windows like whispered secrets. But the peace we had built, like all peace in this world, existed on a foundation of vigilance. There were still enemies. There were always enemies. And sometimes, despite every precaution, they found ways through the walls we had constructed. It happened 6 months after the wedding, on a night when Dominic was away at a meeting in another city. I was in the library with Isabella, helping her with a history project about ancient Rome when the lights went out. Not just in the library, everywhere. The entire house plunged into darkness, and in that darkness I heard the sound that had haunted my nightmares since the attack on the carriage house. Breaking glass, running footsteps, voices that did not belong. Isabella's hand found mine in the dark. She was trembling, but she did not scream. She was her father's daughter in that way, composed under pressure, saving her fear for later. "Miss Alma," she whispered, "I mean Mom. What do we do?" "We stay quiet," I told her, "and we move. I knew this house better than almost anyone. I had cleaned every corner of it, memorized every hallway, cataloged every door and window and hidden passage. There was a room behind the library, a servant's corridor that led to the wine cellar, and from there a tunnel that connected to the pool house on the far side of the property. Dominic had shown it to me months ago, making me memorize the route, making me practice it in daylight and darkness until I could navigate it blindfolded. I never thought I would have to use it. We moved through the hidden door and into the narrow corridor, Isabella's hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel her pulse through her fingers. The darkness was absolute. I counted steps, felt for the walls, guided us around corners I could see only in my memory. Behind us, I heard shouts, gunfire, the sounds of Dominic's security team engaging whoever had breached the perimeter. I prayed they would hold. I prayed we would reach the tunnel before anyone discovered where we had gone. The wine cellar was cool and damp, the air thick with the smell of oak barrels and aged vintage. I found the hidden panel by touch, pressed the sequence Dominic had made me memorize, and felt the wall give way beneath my hands. "In here," I whispered to Isabella. "Stay close." The tunnel was long and narrow, barely wide enough for us to walk side by side. The darkness pressed against us like a living thing, and I could hear Isabella's breathing quicken with fear. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be all right, but I did not have the words. Instead, I held her hand and kept moving, counting the steps, tracking our progress through the underground passage. We emerged in the pool house to the sound of sirens in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered through the windows, emergency vehicles racing up the long drive. I pulled Isabella into the shadows and waited, watching, listening for any sign that the threat had followed us. Marco found us 20 minutes later, his face grim, his clothes streaked with blood that was not his own. "The house is secure," he said. "They were professionals, 7 of them. 3 are dead, 2 are in custody, 2 escaped. We think they were sent by the Ricci family." "Isabella," I said. "She needs to be somewhere safe." Marco nodded. "I have already called your husband. He's on his way back. Until he arrives, you and the girl stay here. I have men on every approach." I looked at Isabella, at her pale face and her trembling hands and the courage she was trying so hard to maintain. She was 10 years old. She had seen too much, known too much, lived a life that no child should have to live. And yet, she was still standing, still holding my hand, still trusting me to keep her safe. "You did good," I told her. "You were so brave." "I was scared," she admitted, "but you said to be quiet and move, so I did." "That is what bravery is," I said. "Being scared and doing the right thing anyway." She leaned into me, and I wrapped my arms around her, and we waited in the darkness for Dominic to come home. He arrived 3 hours later, his face drawn with exhaustion and fear. He found us in the pool house, still huddled together, and for a long moment he simply stood in the doorway looking at us with an expression that broke my heart. "I thought I lost you," he said. "When Marco called and told me what happened, I thought I lost you both." "We are okay," I said. "We got out. We used the tunnel, just like you showed me." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled us both into his arms, holding us so tightly I could barely breathe. Isabella made a small sound against his chest, and I felt his whole body shudder with relief. "This cannot happen again," he said. "I will not let this happen again." And he meant it. In the weeks that followed, he dismantled the Ricci family's operations piece by piece, working with a ruthless efficiency that reminded me of who he truly was. The men who had escaped were found. The ones who had survived were questioned. Information flowed, and with it, consequences that I did not want to know about. I never asked what happened to them. I understood that there were parts of his world I could not enter, decisions he made that I would not want to understand. But I also understood that everything he did to protect us, to protect me, to protect Isabella. He was not a good man by any conventional measure. He had done terrible things and would do terrible things again. But he was mine, and I was his. and in the strange arithmetic of love, that was enough. The summer after the attack, we went away. Dominic owned a house in the hills above the coast, a place he had bought years ago and rarely visited. It was smaller than the estate, simpler, with white walls and terracotta tiles and windows that opened onto a garden filled with olive trees and lavender. For 2 months, we lived there as if we were ordinary people. Dominic worked from his phone and his laptop, conducting business in hushed conversations while Isabella and I explored the countryside. We swam in the sea. We ate fresh bread from the village bakery. We watched sunsets from the terrace and counted stars from the garden and let ourselves believe just for a moment that this peace could last forever. Isabella thrived. Away from the guards and the gates and the constant shadow of her father's profession, she became a different child, lighter, freer. She made friends with the baker's daughter and learned to ride horses at a farm down the road. She came home every evening with stories spilling from her lips, so excited she could barely get the words out fast enough. I watched her and felt something shift inside me. This was what childhood was supposed to look like. This was what I had been robbed of, what she had been robbed of, what so many children in her father's world would never have. And for these precious weeks, she had it. She had normalcy and adventure and the simple, uncomplicated joy of being young. On our last night in the house, Dominic found me on the terrace staring at the stars. He sat down beside me and took my hand, and for a while we did not speak. "I have made a decision," he said finally. "I am stepping back. Not all the way, not immediately. But I am beginning the process of transitioning leadership to Marco and the others. By the time Isabella is ready for high school, I want to be out completely." I turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign that he was not serious. He was the head of one of the most powerful families in the country. Walking away was not something people in his position did. "Can you do that?" I asked. "Is that even possible?" "It will take years," he said, "and there will be difficulties. But I want something different now. I want to be the kind of father who attends school plays and meets teachers for conferences. I want to be the kind of husband who comes home every night instead of disappearing for days at a time. I want to grow old with you, and I cannot do that if I am constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to put a bullet in my back." I felt tears prick at my eyes. I blinked them away, but he saw them anyway. "You changed me," he said softly. "You made me want things I never thought I would want. A real life, a real family, something beyond power and money and the endless game of survival." I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. "I love you," I said. "Whatever you decide, I love you." "I know," he said. "That is why I'm deciding this." We returned to the estate at the end of summer, and life resumed its familiar rhythms. But there were changes, subtle at first, then more pronounced. Dominic began delegating responsibilities he had never trusted anyone else to handle. He spent more time with Isabella, taking her to school in the mornings, helping her with homework in the evenings. He was present in a way he had never been before, and I watched the bond between them deepen with every passing day. The staff noticed. Mrs. Castellano, who had served this family for decades, observed the changes with an expression that might have been approval. The guards relaxed their posture slightly when Dominic was nearby, no longer expecting the cold efficiency that had defined his leadership. Even Marco, who had been his right hand for 20 years, seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight he had been carrying had finally been lifted. A year after our summer away, on a cool autumn evening when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and rain, I told Dominic about the secret I had been keeping. We were in our bedroom, the one we shared now, the one that had once been his alone. He was reading by the fire, and I was sitting by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I'm pregnant," I said. He looked up from his book. For a moment, his expression did not change, and I felt a flutter of fear in my chest. "Are you certain?" he asked. I nodded. "I saw the doctor this morning. She confirmed it. We are going to have a baby." The book slipped from his fingers. He crossed the room to me, knelt at my feet, and took my hands in his. "A baby," he repeated, and there was wonder in his voice, and disbelief, and something that might have been tears gathering in his eyes. "Are you happy?" I asked, because I needed to hear him say it. "Happy," he said, "does not begin to describe what I'm feeling." He pulled me into his arms, and we held each other in the fading light, and I thought about the chain of events that had led us to this moment. A phone call I was not supposed to understand. A choice I made to risk everything. A little girl with dark eyes who gave me a drawing of a house. I thought about my mother, who had given up her family for love and never regretted it. I thought about my father, who had crossed oceans to build a life with the woman he adored. I thought about the language they had given me, the secret gift that had saved a man's life and changed my own forever. "Thank you," Dominic whispered against my hair. "For what?" "For everything. For choosing me. For staying. For giving me a family I never thought I would have." I pulled back to look at his face. There were tears on his cheeks, this man who never cried, this man who had been so afraid of vulnerability that he had spent decades building walls around his heart. "You gave me a family too," I said. "You and Isabella. You made me belong somewhere. After so many years of being invisible, you saw me. You really saw me. I will always see you," he said, "for the rest of my life." Isabella was overjoyed when we told her the news. She had opinions about names and nursery colors and whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. She began collecting books about being a big sister, reading them every night before bed, preparing herself for the role with the same dedication she brought to everything. The months passed, my body changed, life continued, and on a spring morning, when the garden was in bloom and the world smelled of flowers and possibility, our son was born. He had his father's dark eyes and my mother's stubborn chin, and when I held him for the first time, I felt the last broken piece of my heart slide into place. Dominic stood beside my hospital bed looking at our son with an expression of awe. Isabella sat in the chair by the window watching her new brother with careful attention. "What will we call him?" she asked. We had discussed names for months without reaching a conclusion, but in that moment, looking at the tiny face of my child, I knew. "Samuel," I said, "after my father." Dominic nodded, understanding without explanation that this name meant something important. "Samuel Valenti," he said. "It suits him. The early days with a newborn were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Samuel was a quiet baby, content to sleep against my chest for hours at a time, waking only to feed and then drifting back into dreams. Isabella appointed herself his protector, hovering nearby whenever he was awake, ready to fetch blankets or sing lullabies or simply watch him with the fierce devotion of a child who had waited years for a sibling. Dominic, meanwhile, revealed a capacity for tenderness that still surprised me even after all our years together. He held Samuel with the careful precision of a man handling something infinitely precious, his large hands gentle against the baby's small body. He walked the floors with him at night when I was too exhausted to move, singing Italian lullabies in a low voice that seemed to soothe Samuel more effectively than anything else. I watched them together, father and son, and felt a peace settle into my bones that I had not known I was missing. This was what life was supposed to look like. This was what my mother had been trying to give me when she taught me her language in the darkness, passing down a piece of herself that would outlast her own life. And now I would do the same for Samuel, teaching him Italian while I braided his sister's hair, sharing stories about a heritage he would carry forward into whatever future awaited him. 3 years passed in what felt like moments and lifetimes. Samuel grew from an infant into a toddler, then into a small boy with his father's intensity and my tendency toward watchfulness. He followed Isabella everywhere, adoring her with the uncomplicated devotion of a child who does not yet understand that siblings can be complicated. She, in turn, took her role as big sister seriously, teaching him colors and shapes and the names of flowers in the garden. The estate changed around us. Dominic's transition was nearly complete now, his role reduced to advisor rather than leader. Marco had taken over the day-to-day operations, running things with the same quiet efficiency that had made him invaluable for so many years. The security protocols remained in place. The guards still walked their routes, but there was a lightness to everything now. An acknowledgement that the worst dangers had passed, that the enemies had been neutralized, that this family was no longer at the center of anyone's crosshairs. On a summer evening, when the estate was filled with family and laughter and the sound of children playing in the garden, I stood on the terrace and watched the people I loved. Isabella, 13 now and growing into a remarkable young woman, was teaching Samuel to catch fireflies in a jar. Dominic was supervising from a nearby bench, his role in the family business long since handed over to Marco and the others. Mrs. Castellano was directing the serving staff with her usual efficiency. And I was here, in this house that had become my home, surrounded by everything I had never dared to dream of. Our family. The word still made something warm bloom in my chest. Isabella called me Mom now, had started the day after the wedding and never stopped. Samuel called me Mama and followed me everywhere, his small hand always reaching for mine. And Dominic, who had been so afraid of love that he had spent years keeping everyone at arm's length, had become the kind of husband and father who was present for every moment, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday morning. I thought sometimes about the woman I had been, the invisible maid who had overheard a phone call and made a choice. I thought about how easily I could have walked away that night, how easily I could have protected myself and left this family to its fate. The language my mother gave me, the secret I had guarded for so long, had become the bridge between my old life and my new one. It had allowed me to understand the danger. It had given me the power to act when action was terrifying. It had connected me to a man who would become my husband and children, who would become my reason for everything. But I had not walked away. I had chosen to stay, to risk, to love. And now, standing on this terrace with the sunset painting the sky and my children's laughter filling the air, I understood something that my mother had tried to teach me so many years ago. Home is not a place. It is not a house, or a country, or a language. Home is the people who see you, truly see you, and love you anyway. Home is the family you choose, the life you build, the future you create with your own hands and your own heart and your own courage. Dominic appeared beside me, sliding his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder as we watched the children together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Everything," I said. "The phone call, the choice I made, how different my life would have been if I had stayed silent." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was low. "I have thought about that too, more times than I can count. I think about how close I came to losing everything, and I think about the woman who risked her life to warn me. A woman I had never even noticed before that moment. A woman who was supposed to be invisible." I turned in his arms to face him, searching his eyes. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Any of it?" He shook his head, and there was no hesitation in his expression. "The only thing I regret is all the years I wasted being afraid, being closed, being the man everyone expected me to be instead of the man I wanted to become." I reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines that had deepened over our years together. "You are the man I love," I said. "The man who reads bedtime stories and attends school plays and learns firefly catching techniques so he can teach his son. That is who you are now. That is who you chose to be. Because of you," he said. "Because you showed me it was possible." We stood there together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Samuel came running across the lawn, a jar of fireflies clutched triumphantly in his hands, Isabella following close behind. "Look, Mama! Look what we caught!" I knelt down to examine his treasure, watching the tiny lights pulse inside the glass. "They are beautiful," I told him. "But you know what we have to do, right?" He nodded solemnly. "Let them go, so they can find their families. That is right." Together, we walked to the edge of the garden and unscrewed the lid. The fireflies drifted out into the evening air, their lights blinking as they scattered into the darkness. "Goodbye, fireflies," Samuel called after them. "Have a good night." I felt Dominic's hand on my shoulder, felt Isabella lean into my side, felt Samuel's small fingers wrap around mine. And in that moment, surrounded by everyone I loved, I knew that I had found something I had been searching for my entire life without ever knowing it. I had found my home. How long was the story?